9th century China. A group of alchemists are hunched over a stone furnace, mixing sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. They are not trying to build a weapon. They are trying to build a potion. They want to live forever. What happens next nearly burns the building down. Chinese Taoist alchemists had spent centuries searching for an elixir of immortality. Somewhere around 850 AD, one of their formulas did something no one expected. It didn't heal. It didn't extend life. It exploded. A 9th century Taoist text called the Genuan Miaodao Yaolui actually warns other alchemists about this exact mixture, saying men had been burned, their hands and faces scorched, and even entire houses burned down. Think about that. The earliest written record of gunpowder isn't a battle plan, it's a safety warning. So here's the question nobody expects going in. What if the deadliest invention in human history didn't start as a weapon at all? For the first 200 years, gunpowder was barely a weapon either. It was a novelty. Chinese engineers packed it into bamboo tubes and used it for fireworks, signals, and ceremonies. Loud, bright, mostly harmless. Then someone asked a different question. What if you pointed it at a person? By 1044 AD, a Chinese military text called the Wujing Zongyao recorded the first known written formulas for gunpowder used in war. Not firework, weapons. It described early gunpowder bombs that could be hurled by catapults, and fire arrows tipped with burning charges. The historian Joseph Needham, who spent decades studying the history of Chinese science, called this the true beginning of the gunpowder age. But there's a problem. An explosion isn't a gun. A gun needs a barrel. It needs a way to aim the explosion in one direction, and that took almost 200 more years to figure out. The breakthrough came in the form of something called a fire lance. Picture a spear with a bamboo tube strapped to the tip, packed with gunpowder and scraps of metal or pottery shards. When a soldier lit the fuse, it didn't just burn, it sprayed flame and shrapnel forward, like a short-range flamethrower crossed with a shotgun. It was clumsy, it was dangerous to the person holding it, but it was the first time in history a human being pointed a tube at another human being and used a controlled explosion to hurt them from a distance. Why does that moment matter so much? Because up until this point, every weapon in human history required physical strength and physical proximity. A sword needs an arm swinging it. An arrow needs a bow pulled taut, muscles straining against string. Even a thrown spear obeys the limits of the human shoulder. War had always been, at its core, a contest of bodies. The fire lance broke that rule. For the first time, the force behind a weapon didn't come from a human muscle. It came from a chemical reaction. A weak soldier and a strong soldier could now kill with equal ease. That single shift would eventually rewrite the entire logic of warfare. Gunpowder didn't stay in China, it traveled. Historians still debate the exact route, but most agree it moved west along trade networks during the era of Mongol expansion in the 1200s. The Mongol armies, who conquered from the Pacific to Eastern Europe, carried gunpowder technology with them, whether through direct use, captured engineers, or simple cultural contact along the Silk Road. By the mid-1200s, gunpowder had reached the Islamic world and Europe. In England, a Franciscan friar named Roger Bacon wrote about a loud, flashing substance in the 1260s, describing something that could be made from saltpeter and other ingredients to produce a noise like thunder. Bacon wasn't a weapons designer, he was a scholar, cautiously describing something he clearly did not fully understand and possibly feared. Within 100 years, Europe stopped being cautious. By the 1320s, the first true cannons appear in European records and manuscripts, crude iron or bronze tubes designed to launch a single, heavy projectile using gunpowder's explosive force. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, English forces are recorded using early cannons against French cavalry. The weapons were slow, unreliable, and terrifying to hear, more psychological weapon than precision tool. But they work, and once something works on a battlefield, it never goes away. It only gets improved. Here's where it gets interesting. Once cannons existed, the next question was obvious. Could you make one small enough for a single person to carry? The answer took another century of trial and error. Early hand cannons in the 1300s and 1400s were essentially miniature cannons on sticks, metal tubes mounted on wood, ignited by touching a burning cord to a small hole. No trigger, no aiming mechanism, just a controlled explosion held at arm's length, pointed roughly at the enemy, and hoped for the best. Then came the matchlock, developed in the 1400s, which finally added something resembling a trigger. A curved lever held a smoldering cord, called a mat, and pulling it lowered the cord into the gunpowder automatically. For the first time, a soldier could aim with both hands and fire without directly touching flame to powder themselves. It doesn't sound like much, But think about what it actually changed. A soldier no longer needed years of training to be dangerous. A crossbow took real skill. A longbow, historians estimate, could take a decade to master, requiring bone structure and muscle developed from childhood. A matchlock gun took weeks. What does it mean when killing stops requiring mastery? For the first time in human history, a nation could take a farmer, hand him a weapon, give him a few weeks of instruction, and put him on equal footing with a knight who had trained his entire life. Armor, forged and fitted over months by skilled smiths. Protection that had defined the aristocratic warrior class for centuries could now be punched through by a piece of metal fired from a cheap iron tube. The gun didn't just change warfare, it changed who got to fight. By the mid-1400s, massive cannons were reshaping the world in a different way entirely. Not through soldiers, but through walls. Monsmeg, a giant siege cannon built around 1449, could fire a stone ball weighing over 150 kilograms, capable of destroying medieval castle walls that had stood as symbols of unbreakable power for hundreds of years. Castles had defined political power in Europe for centuries. Whoever held the strongest walls held the strongest position. Gunpowder made walls obsolete almost overnight. On a historical timescale, a fortress that had taken decades to build and had never fallen to siege could now be breached in days. So let's go back to the beginning. A handful of alchemists, searching for a way to live forever, mixed the wrong ingredients together and instead built the tool that would define how nations rise, how battles are won, and how power moves from the strong to the armed. They weren't trying to kill anyone. They were trying to cheat death. And in a strange, quiet irony, the thing they built to defeat death became the most efficient way in human history to deliver it.